大家好，欢迎收看本周的对话华尔街。那么本周中呢，我们请到了两位在中国有非常多年商业经历的，一位是美国的投资人，另一位呢是代表中国公司进行投资人关系的专家，来一起和我们探讨一下中美的商业文化差异。
Hello, gentlemen. Glad to have you here on our show. You two have a lot of experience in doing business in China. Can you share a little bit with us?
Yeah, I am from New York. I moved to China in the south city of Shenzhen in 2006 to launch Asian operations for a U.S. logistics company. Subsequently, for the next few years, I was doing a lot of investor relations and communications for Chinese executives with companies that were listed in the U.S.
Okay, Kerry?
I started working in China really end of 2003, beginning in 2004, putting together a team to figure out how to properly invest in the mainland, and have been working ever since, both investing, advising on M&A transactions, and also as an investment banker.
Okay, so after so many years experience, what is the biggest difficulties you figure out when you dealing with Chinese companies or the local government, or just in general doing business in China?
The biggest problem, I think, is simply cultural, understanding where each other are coming from, trying to identify goals that both parties can move towards together, and primarily when you talk about the public markets and Chinese companies and investment, primarily transparency and educating the Chinese entrepreneur on transparency and learning about how transparency impacts the Chinese on the mainland from the investor perspective.
So it's both cultural and developmental problems.
Cultural and development problems primarily. And then it's an education process.
Yeah. What about you?
I would agree with Kerry from the cultural perspective. I would also expand that to say, in general, just communication. I think that we have a certain way that we communicate and get things done in New York, which may also be different from another place in the U.S. From the cultural perspective, when I first went to China, I was a bit of an overconfident New Yorker, and I tried to take a lot of American business style performance management, for example, and force feed it on building a Chinese team and working with some Chinese clients. I quickly learned over 6 months to a year that my first meeting in New York over a lunch, after 20 minutes I can get into discussion about doing a deal or a contract. In China, and this is a cultural example, it might take 5 or 6 meetings of learning about our background and our family before we discuss anything business related. So just a very simple example about the importance of the cultural differences.
What about the political system? Have you found any difficulties with that?
I found some problems if you end up, not as much in Beijing, but on the local municipal level in a variety of provinces where I've done business. Some projects have moved very smoothly in conjunction with the relevant government authorities, and some have been complicated by the relevant authorities.
What about you?
I would say that the political system is certainly evolving. I do like the fact that despite what's happening globally, or despite external pressures to Beijing, they stick with objectives and well-defined goals that primarily are focused around growth within their 5-year plan. So it's a little easier to understand what their plans are from following what that outline is. But getting things done there can be a challenge.
But I have had a problem specifically when policy trumps the law. So essentially you can have an agreement with a party. The policy may change, which might impact that agreement, and the agreement automatically becomes null and void. I've had this happen a number of times where you had an agreement in place for a number of years. The policy changed, maybe the mayor changed, maybe the local government official changed.
So there's no respect for the contract?
There's no respect for the contract. There's no continuation of responsibility of the entity, because it was the former the former head of the organization's problem, not the new organization. So it becomes problematic, and that's going to have to change over time.
You had 10 years experience in China. You had roughly 5 years. Have you seen any progressive development in narrowing this gap between U.S. and China?
Absolutely. I think China's made unbelievable strides, actually, in pretty much every area that I'm concerned with, and have identified themselves the problems within the system that need to get fixed. So I'm patient. I understand it's going to take time, but I have to wait before I make any additional bets on China for the system to develop.
What about you?
Yeah, I think that there have been a lot of exchanges, forums, conferences. I just came from a luncheon today at Columbia University, the business school, which is participated by 70 Chinese CEOs, private companies, public companies, small up to mid-cap, all trying to learn more about how to do business in the U.S., how to recruit and engage business school graduates from the U.S. that have an experience in education that's based on the Western system. I think this is one of a number of examples of events and conferences, focused on both sides, trying to better understand how the other operates, how they can integrate, how they can put cultural differences aside and focus on a common objective. But I would agree with Kerry that it's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, sure. We also know a lot of fraud and scandals about the Chinese company exposed this year, and there's a lot of backlash and attack from Wall Street to China. And as you just mentioned, the investor is losing faith, losing confidence to China. So as a U.S. investor and as the Chinese company communicator, what's your take on this event?
Wall Street's a funny place. So once they identify what they think is an issue, they generally attack that issue, and it becomes the dominant theme. So what happened is some of these investigators found some real problems, some real fraud in certain companies. The problem is then Wall Street started attacking all Chinese companies.
Yes.
And this is not, it's not fair. It's just kind of the way of the street. It's how markets are corrected. It's how things are repriced. So right now, from an investor's perspective, myself, my hedge fund clients, my hedge fund friends, my mutual fund friends, in general, they think U.S. listed Chinese companies are uninvestable because of the lack of confidence, the ease at which their financials can be attacked, and the lack of understanding of what transparency means of the management teams. So it's problematic for sure, and I think it's going to have at least a 2-year hangover.
So how would you help Chinese companies to get through this hard time?
Do we have a few hours? No. No, I think a lot of the Chinese companies need to focus on strengthening their communications and investor relations functions. I think it's a very simple answer that can be done in the short term. A few companies that I know of have a presence in the U.S. They either have investor relations or in finance. In some cases, there are CFOs that are based in the U.S. So they have a better understanding of U.S. policy, U.S. GAAP, SEC regulations, and how to communicate and understand the sometimes complex game of Wall Street. So I think that's a great step in the right direction, to get a presence in the U.S. and people that can represent the companies on the ground in the U.S. That's in the short term. In the mid to long term, a lot of these companies need to bring in not necessarily Western trained executives and managers, but executives that have spent time outside the mainland, that have experience in global capital markets, in corporate governance, in transparency with investors that are outside the mainland. I think that's a main challenge for a lot of Chinese executives and entrepreneurs. And these are steps that can help to shore them up and build a a base of credibility for them going forward.
在150年前的时候，中国被西方的坚船利炮打开了国门之后，清政府首先想到的是师夷长技以制夷，也就是用西方先进的技术来武装起自己的国防力量。这也很像在改革开放之后，很多中国公司呢都在不停地引进西方和日韩先进的生产线以及技术一样。然而，在北洋水师拥有了船坚利炮，拥有了世界上先进的一支舰队之后，仍然被日本人在甲午海战中打得惨败一样。那么，中国人在之后呢，又开始想到了要学习西方先进的制度。那么，这也很像现在的很多的中国公司呢，也需要一些西方先进的公司治理、财务审计、运营等各方面的制度建设。历史的教训呢，也就告诉我们，硬实力只有配合上软实力，才能发挥出它的效果。然而，就像戊戌变法和国民革命最终失败了一样，我并不认为中国公司呢在商业文化上应该全盘的西化。每个民族的商业制度呢，或多或少都有其文化渗透其中，就像德国人的严谨、美国人的创新和法国人的浪漫一样。现在重要的呢，是对我们中国的商业文化进行去其糟粕、取其精华的一个改善和完备，让我们的公司呢能够更好的跟国际接轨，建立真正属于中国的商业软实力。好的，感谢您收看本周的对话华尔街，我们下周再见。